Welcome to RuralStrong, where we talk real challenges and bold solutions in rural economic development. I'm your host, Joe Barker. Let's get into it. This is Joe Barker, and welcome to RuralStrong, the podcast brought to you from the Southwest Tennessee Development District podcast studios in Jackson, Tennessee. And we have a great guest today, a gentleman that has dedicated most of his life to rural and economic development, Andy Portera. Andy, welcome to RuralStrong.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate you having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, instead of me reading a long bio, tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you became so focused on rural areas.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in West Point, Mississippi, which is in the Golden Triangle. I'd say it's about 15,000 people, but grew up over in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, just across the state line. Actually went to law school and started as a lawyer, worked in law for about a decade, joined a family business. And then my father and I are in Portera Associates, which is the economic development consulting group we have. But he got involved in economic development back in the 80s when he was at the University of Alabama and was on the team that helped recruit Mercedes-Benz to the state of Alabama and kind of launched the car industry in our state. So he actually kind of got me involved. Funny story, my first economic development job was picking up trash and debris on the side of the road where the Mercedes-Benz executives were coming through to look at the property that we were trying to get them to pick for the plant. So I didn't know what I was doing at the time. It was kind of a top secret mission, and I was in college. But so economic development and creating jobs and opportunities, I call it kind of a family business. My dad has been at it for almost 45 years or so probably, but it's always kind of been a focus of his to kind of try to connect what education is doing and a lot of higher education to the economy and the community to try to help create education, training opportunities, but also to retain and create jobs. So that's kind of how we got into it. When he retired about 12 or 13 years ago, he started consulting with some towns and got into some projects that were a little more labor intensive than he wanted. So he talked me into joining him, I'd say about 11 or so years ago. So I've been at it ever since. Our home state is Mississippi. So it just, a lot of our professional work has been over there, but we've kind of traveled all around the Southeast and had fun trying to help communities hold on to the jobs they have, but also create new ones and create better linkages between education and business and just a whole bunch of different things. But it's been a good time.
Well, that leads us into, I guess, a subject that I would like to focus on today, and that's workforce development. I grew up in a rural area, live in a rural area, and all my life that's been one of the great challenges is, we want to recruit jobs, but do we have the workforce to meet the demands of those jobs? So if you were talking to that rural community, Andy, where do you start in this process?
Yeah, that's a good question. And a lot of the communities we go into, when you kind of think about economic development or you're thinking about making your community a better, stronger, the first thing that comes to most community leaders' mind is when are we going to land that project that brings, whether it's 100 jobs, 150, 200, or whatever it is, and a lot of millions of dollars of investment and those things like that. And fortunately, we've been involved in some of those recruiting projects and are still kind of doing that. But I think you've got to focus, especially in rural areas, but really all areas. I think you got to focus on, we call it kind of focus on you first. You got to take a hard look at your community, try to identify the gaps and the opportunities. It's all about taking what you have, trying to make that as strong as you can, trying to get groups to communicate and collaborate, which that can be tough. What economic development is, it's a team sport, but it's a tough sport. So for us, it's going into communities and really doing an assessment over 2 or 3 months or so, maybe a little bit more, getting an idea of what the ecosystem looks like in terms of workforce development, talking. This is, in-person interviews with businesses, kind of getting real-time feedback, talking with the educational partners, K through 12, community colleges, and the four-year college, satellite campus, or college, if you got one in your community. But it's all about kind of getting the lay of the land and putting a plan together, and then you got to go do it. So most communities have the components of that they need for workforce development. Too often they're just kind of fragmented and working in their own, trying to keep their head above water, whether it's education or business. And so the real trick is kind of connecting those dots and getting those groups to communicate and collaborate. And if you can do that, have some momentum, and then just keep it going. That's kind of our focus. You got to start with focusing on you first, and then you can go from there.
Talk a little bit, Andy, about that linkage between education and workforce. And I know we all understand that you need that educated workforce, you need that skilled workforce, but it's critical, is it not, to have that linkage with education?
Yeah, I think it's the most important relationship that you can have in your community, especially as it relates to job retention and job creation. I think you just got to have kind of a constant open line of communication between your education, and I mean K through 12, community colleges, 4 years if you got them, and all your different types of businesses and industries and sectors and things. A lot of times this workforce kind of falls in that community college bucket. That's where a lot of folks look at and turn to, and they play a huge role, don't get me wrong, but I think to be successful in these days and times, you got to look it's got to be a community-wide effort. And that's why in the economic development agencies and chambers and organizations that we kind of work with, we kind of like to have them slide into help facilitate the communication and the collaboration and support that, because it's easier said than done. It can be a heavy lift to kind of get those groups talking and substantively kind of collaborating on things. But I think it's an absolute critical piece to the success of your community.
So community engagement, working alongside the education piece, are then what you would call two of the most important factors in developing that workforce.
Yeah, for sure. The successes we've been fortunate enough to have always been to try to identify the educational assets in the community, to try to do our best to kind of grow them and develop them, create bigger educational assets. And then the key is the linkage to what's going on in the business and industry that you got. Because at the end of the day, education is critically important, but the businesses that are there that are, trying to push that product out or trying to provide that service, whether it be locally, regionally, nationally, globally, they've got to kind of dictate and drive what your workforce ecosystem kind of looks like. And then education can come in there and do everything they can to kind of support them. It's definitely a two-way street, but they know what they need more than anybody.
Andy, I know you travel in rural communities throughout the Southeast, and I guess my next question is, how significant is the skills gap in rural areas, and are there specific skills that you see that are most in demand?
Yeah, I would say there are skills gaps everywhere. They, different parts of, we've gone as far as West Virginia and Mississippi and all over the South, but definitely different regions present some unique challenges. Some communities present unique challenge, but I would say the biggest thing is, I hear from probably 90+% of industry that we meet with, businesses that we meet with, is just the lack of the basics. And I'm talking like work ethic and wanting to show up every day and do a good job, and having kind of an accountability, leadership, the things that you or I or, generations in the past have been fortunate enough to have been modeled by our parents or grandparents. There's just a lack of that. So in most of my meetings with business and industry, it doesn't matter what state or what community, most of them say, Andy, if you can get me people that come through the door with just that basic kind of work ethic, ability to work with others, if you can get me that, I can get them the rest. I can get them. That's not to say there's not technical skills gaps, but most all of them tell me that. So that's a challenge.
Soft skills, as we call it here, and have you seen particular programs that communities have put in place to address the soft skills?
Yeah, for sure. So we were working in a community in East Central Mississippi about 12 years ago, and we kept hearing that from different employers about how the people that were coming through their doors, they just didn't have the basics that they needed. They didn't have those things that we just kind of covered: the life skills, job skills, soft skills, whatever you want to call them. And my dad's was in his probably early 70s at the time, and it really got on him pretty bad to hear that there were jobs out there that were paying good money, that they couldn't find the bodies that had the want to do them. So I kind of set out on a mission to try to see what kind of programs, what kind of, if there were some curriculums in schools and things like that. So I was meeting with the Mississippi State University folks one day, and they put me on Stephen Covey's Leader in Me program, and they were doing it really well in Vicksburg, Mississippi at the time. And so I've been fortunate enough to take several communities down there to take a look at it, but it's really neat. If any of your listeners or anybody's interested in kind of taking a look at it, it's a program that kind of instills those Covey 7 habits into students as young as pre-K, and it's teaching them the work ethic and the accountability and the leadership, all those things those employers talk about. Some of these kids are getting it in, when they're 4.5, 5 years old, and they've got programs that run from pre-K to 12, and then they also have post-secondary programs that look a lot differently, obviously, because the students are different ages. But that's one thing that we have utilized that I think helps in that area of developing those skills that are so desperately needed.
Well, and I hear this from employers everywhere, Andy, is that those soft skills, and I agree with you 100%. We need something in our educational system that helps teach these soft skills. The other thing is, we have a whole new generation of young people coming in to the workforce. I told someone the other day that, I've been working in this organization a long time and interviewed a lot of folks for job openings. And several years ago, when you'd get to the end of the interview and you would ask the applicant if they had any questions for you, most of the time it would have something to do with benefits. And
Right.
Now with the workforce, when I get down to the end and ask that question, one of the first questions to me is, do you have a remote work policy? And so we've got a whole new generation, Andy.
Yeah, we definitely do. And I definitely appreciate that comment and that story. We do, and I think there's just going to be a need, every day going forward. We're just going to have to do our best to kind of adapt to the changing landscape. That's, when we help communities kind of put together strategic plans, we like to have a long-term vision, but I don't really think you can look more than a few years out, just the way things are changing and the way things are moving. So that is definitely a challenge. And some businesses are kind of set up where they can go remote and be as successful, and there's just some that can't. So I think there's going to be an education piece going forward. We've talked about the life and the job skills, but there's so many things that, I think we're going to have to try to instill and teach this kind of next generation, to get them ready for the workforce and their expectations. I often hear about, the expectations just kind of being out of whack with reality. So I think we're going to have to try to focus on, doing as much as we can, as often as we can in terms of setting their expectations, about what's possible, what it's going to take to get there, how long it's going to take to get there. So it definitely is a challenge that I agree with you on.
Sure. I'm a huge baseball fan, and I always hear the commentators talk about whether it's a hitter or a pitcher that they have to adjust, and I guess the employers, we have to adjust to the new workforce, and that's just one of the things that's necessary for us to do. Let's talk a little bit about policies or programs that maybe local or state or federal government can do to best support workforce development in rural areas. Are there certain programs that, say, our state government can do that would help better promote developing the workforce in rural areas?
Yeah, I think you're with Trump, the Trump administration bill is going to push a lot of those federal workforce dollars, if it's passed, into the state and local communities. So I think the state and local communities are obviously the ones that are best positioned to kind of come up with solutions that are going to best benefit, rural communities. They know what they need. So, in terms of policies and programs that they can do, I really think it's going to take, to have sustainable long-term effect, I think you're going to have to get community by community to do the kind of the things that we were talking about earlier in terms of taking a hard look at your ecosystem, identifying where the problems are on the industry side, on the education side. You got to bridge that gap. And it's going to look a little bit different in each community depending on what the needs are and what the assets are on the education side and the industry side. But it's the key to our success is going to be the ability to kind of bridge that gap between education and business. That's critical. It doesn't matter you can throw all these programs into these communities and these workforce development ecosystems, but if you don't have that kind of constant communication and collaboration where industry is getting what they need and the education is kind of getting the support and all the tools they need and resources, then I just don't think at the end it's not going to be kind of a sustainable solution. So I think you got to build it out locally, but you got to lean on your state programs. There's a ton of good state programs, a lot of kind of ready to work programs where they target 18 to 24-year-old out of work folks and kind of get them into like an 8-week program or a 12-week program and just teach them some basic skills, but then connect them with employment post-class if they kind of get through it and graduate. So there's a ton of effective things that I've seen that I think can really have an impact in communities. But I think you got to start with kind of identifying what you got, where you are, making a plan locally, and then building it out from there with as many partners as you can.
I agree totally. And in the few minutes we've got left, I think the other thing that we all encounter is through the years there's been this stigma about that maybe rural areas are less desirable places to work compared to urban settings. And I think this goes back to the community. Would you agree that you have to take a holistic approach with your community to do things in your community that will attract that younger worker, that young family?
Oh, I completely agree. There's so much that goes under that economic development, community development umbrella. There's so many different facets, but I do think you've got to look at the things that are important to. I was just talking to a group yesterday. You've kind of got to plug into, listen to, and talk to those young people and see what's important. Because I'm 54 years old. What's important to somebody that's 22, 23, 25, we may have a lot of things in common, but there may be things in the community that they want to see that just is really not on my radar. So the quality of life piece is huge. obviously the, career opportunities are huge. But I think a lot of communities could do a better job of letting their students and residents know what the opportunities are, letting them know what training and education is going to take to get them there, and then just making it as accessible as possible. A lot of kids leave to pursue opportunities, but they don't. In a lot of places, they don't know what all the opportunities are at home. It's just. I think there's a little bit of a lack of communication that I think we could, if we help educate and engage them, I think we could retain more of them and hold on to them and attract new ones.
And I think there is a trend today that more people are seeking the rural lifestyle, and with the advance of technology, they can do the same thing from a workplace. Specifically, they can do things in a rural area just like they can do in the urban area.
Absolutely. I was at dinner last night with somebody that sister runs a kind of a high-tech company out in California, and he was telling me that a lot of her employees have packed up and moved to places in the Southeast because of the cost of living piece. They're working remotely. They can do the same thing. The broadband's there, the high speed's there. A lot of the towns even have kind of, community spaces for work. So it's been a win-win for that company, but also the employees. They're, paying a lot less to live. They like the quality of life better. So I do think the opportunity for communities that kind of get their act together, so to speak, or, just do what they need to do to kind of improve themselves on a day-to-day basis. I think there's a huge opportunity to attract some of those, whether it be remote or non-remote kind of workers in the future.
Well, a great conversation today with Andy Portera. He is the co-founder of Portera Associates, working in the rural economic and community development field. And Andy, if any of our listeners wanted to get in touch with you or your firm, tell them how to do that.
Yeah, so we got a website. It's porteraassociates.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I've got a rural development newsletter that I do a couple of times a month that I try to give out different tips and strategies and things. But yeah, you can find all my phone number, my email information on our website, but DM me on LinkedIn if that's the easier way to do it. But you can find me out there, and I certainly appreciate you having me today, Joe. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
All right, Andy, and keep up the good work, my friend.
Thanks, Joe. See you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us on RuralStrong. If you found this helpful, share it, and follow the show for more insights from rural leaders making a real difference. Until next time, stay rural strong.